Hi, Mr. Farmer here, and welcome to AP Microeconomics. Today we're talking about margin utility per dollar, and more specifically the extensions of that and how that pertains to demand. So first off, let's get some practice in. Let's kind of think about this. So why would consumers be wise to use margin utility per dollar versus just margin utility? Again, because consumers are logical. They want to make sure they're getting the most for their dollar spent. So utility maximizing rules to making sure that you get the most use out of that. So the algebraic is margin utility per dollar of one good should be equal to margin utility per dollar of another good like X and Y. So the best allocation is to plug in for this additional utility for the price of the good. So as an example, Hank has $12. So sometimes you have a limitation based on the price. Sometimes there's other ones as well. So product X costs $2, product Y costs $4. How much of each product should he buy? Go and pause the video. When you come back, we're going to go over this. So to the chart, I would add margin utility and margin utility per dollar for good X and also for good Y. So margin utilities for good X, I just plug them in here, 4, 3, 1, -1. For Y, or for margin utility per dollar, I'm just simply dividing the margin utility I calculated by the price at $2, so I get those numbers accordingly. And then for good Y, I get these, and then divided by the $4 price, we get those. 8 divided by 2, that would be it, or 8 divided by 4, I get 2 oodles per dollar. And for the second unit, I got 4 margin utility, or 1 for each dollar spent, and so forth. So the margin utility per dollar equal to margin utility per dollar for good X and Y, that looks like it would be at the third unit, but the problem is that would mean we're overspending money. So I like to use a check method, which is simply, which would I put into my cart first? Well, first I actually put both the first unit of good X and Y because they get the same oodles per dollar. After that, I would buy the second unit of good X because I get $1.50 per, or 1.5 oodles per dollar. And for the second unit of Y, I only get $1. With that said, I'll then buy the second unit of good Y because I do get 1 udel per dollar. And that's my budget. So the answer is I'd actually get 2 of each. You always want to make sure your math is right. So 2 plus 2, so I spent $4 in good X. 4 plus 4, I spent $8 in good Y. And there's my $12. So we've already talked about this, so we're going to keep going. So the applications and extensions of margin utility per dollar. So we used to have the income effect back when we first introduced the demand curve. So the income effect is the impact that change the price of product has on a consumer's real, meaning purchasing power, ability on the quantity demanded of that good. So as the price of the good increases or decreases, the amount that you can buy changes just mathematically. Now before we just did that based on the budget curve. So if the price increasing utility stays the same, then the idea is that the margin utility per dollar has then been affected. It's decreased for that product. So you're going to buy less when it's more expensive because you don't get as much use out of that good. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, let's say a person gets 10 oodles from a product. And here we have utility over here on the right if you need that definition. If the price were $10, then they get 1 oodle per dollar. Okay. But if the price were $5, then they get 2 oodles per dollar. So you get that much more utility. It wasn't because the use of that good increased all the utility, which essentially is the demand for the good, has stayed the same. What has changed is the price. You get more use per dollar because the dollar value has changed. So we're going to link this to change in quantity demanded later. For the substitution effect, the other reason why the demand curve is downsloping, we talked about the impact that change in the product's price has on its relative expensiveness and consequently on the quantity demanded. So as the price of a second good, like Pepsi and Coca-Cola are substitute goods, as the price of one of those changes, you're going to buy more of the other one. Well, let's go back to that. Let's go back to the walk-in. Hank has $12, product X and Y are blah, 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 blah. But what if... All right, so now I get $1 per 1 oodle per dollar for good X, and then 0.75, 0.25, and -0.25. So now how am I going to buy? I used to buy 2 of each of these. Well, now I'm going to buy that first unit of good Y. I'm going to buy the second unit of good Y. I'm going to buy that first unit of good X. So now, because of the price change, I'm buying 2 of good Y and 1 of good X, not 2 of each. Why? Because the use, I don't get as much out of it. So I'm going to buy less of it. Now we have this thing called the paradox of value. So how can you explain that a bottle of water, which is life-giving, is worth $1 and a dime would be worth $1 million? And this is something that Adam Smith debated called the paradox of value. It doesn't make any sense. Well, eventually you would buy your first diamond because the marginal utility of water is pretty low. You need a certain amount to survive, but beyond that, you don't need any more, technically speaking. So you're going to buy a lot of water in your life before you buy that first diamond. So even though it's a paradox, meaning a life-giving thing, which should be very, very expensive, is not. Now again, I think the bigger paradox is eventually people do typically buy diamonds for various different reasons. But the marginal utility per dollar helps explain why this thing in fact happens. So essential goods, like water, are sometimes cost less than non-essential goods, the diamonds. This is a paradox, it doesn't make sense, and yet we all agree that it occurs, and the marginal utility per dollar helps us explain this. Now, if we talk about like value of time for things like cost, we take this into account. So if a person works for $5 an hour, how much is 4 hours of their time? $20. So if a person is self-employed, meaning unless they work, they don't get paid, which would cost more, a $30 round of golf or a $40 concert? Well, the golf takes 4 hours, the concert takes 2 hours. So which is more expensive? Answer, they're the same price because you're giving up the opportunity of working those times, you add that into your cost. So when value time is considered, you do it just like this. In fact, it's just which one do you get more use out of, a golf round or a concert, it's up to you. So the demand curve helps us kind of figure out what these things are. It's encompassed the willingness and the ability, the utility and the price into it. And so we have this curve called the indifference curve, which is really not a major thing, but the idea is that you get the same total utility at all of these points on the curve on the right, A through F. If you get that combination of good Y and good X, you get that same amount. So what we can do is look at this. At different budgets, you might have a different indifference curve, like 1, 2, and 3, meaning you can buy more or less of those. Now, if I overlaid it with something like a budget line, well, I've now combined the willingness, my budget line, and the usefulness of it, am I willing to buy with my indifference curve, the total utility. If I do that, I kind of come up with my demand curve. Again, the demand, it's a nice, elegant thing. It shows both of these concepts. Now, to kind of wrap this up, we're going to be doing some practices in a second, but we can look at this marginal utility per dollar and link it to the demand curve. So if your marginal utility per dollar, or if your marginal utility increased, that's a change in your demand. If your price stayed the same, then you have that curve on the right where it's actually shifting over. Therefore, we're going to buy more since the marginal utility per dollar has increased. What if down below? What if your marginal utility has stayed the same, but the price increased? Well, I'm going to buy less, not because my demand, my marginal utility has changed, but the price has changed. All right, hope this helped. Until next time.